The mansion was silent, the kind of silence that made every tick of the clock echo like thunder. Ethan Moore sat in his grand leather chair by the window, staring at the city lights in the distance. On any other night, those lights would have reminded him of victories, deals closed, empires built, and the billions he had accumulated over a lifetime of hard work and ruthless ambition. But tonight, none of it mattered. His chest felt hollow, his hands trembled as he held a photo of his daughter, Lily, taken only months ago at her 13th birthday. In that picture, she was smiling so wide, her eyes shining with innocence and life. Now, those same eyes, dulled by illness, carried only fatigue and pain. He had flown in doctors from across the world, specialists from Switzerland, surgeons from the United States, herbalists from Asia. He had spared no expense. Experimental treatments, cutting-edge machines, therapies that weren't even publicly available, all of it had been tried. Every morning, he woke with hope that maybe, just maybe, the next procedure would be the miracle they were waiting for. But each night, he returned to this same suffocating silence, more hopeless than the last. The doctor's words echoed in his mind like a cruel curse, 3 months at most. "I'm sorry, Mr. Moore. There's nothing more we can do." For a man who built an empire by defying limits, hearing the words, "nothing more we can do," was unbearable. Money had always solved everything. Now, it was useless. He would have given away his entire fortune in an instant if it meant saving Lily, but no one would take the trade. No deal could be struck with death. He walked to her room, his footsteps heavy on the polished marble floor. The door creaked softly as he pushed it open. Lily lay in bed, her once rosy cheeks pale, her lips dry, her thin frame almost swallowed by the blankets. The sight tore at him, but he forced a small smile. She looked up at him weakly, her eyes trying to sparkle the way they used to. "Hi, Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. "Hi, sweetheart," he replied, pulling a chair close to her bedside. He brushed her hair back gently, the strands thinner now, fragile against his fingertips. "How are you feeling?" She smiled faintly. "A little tired, but I had a nice dream." "What was it about?" he asked, trying to sound cheerful, though his throat was tight. "I was running through a big garden. There were butterflies everywhere, and the sun felt so warm." Her eyes drifted shut for a moment, as if clinging to the dream. Ethan's heart cracked. Running, playing, laughing, all the things she should have been doing at 13, now stolen from her. He wanted to promise her that she'd do all those things again, but the words stuck in his throat. Lying to her felt crueler than silence. As he sat there, lost in his despair, he heard something unusual. A soft voice, lilting and warm, drifting into the room. He turned his head slightly and saw Maria, the maid, kneeling by Lily's bedside. Ethan hadn't even noticed when she entered. She was holding Lily's hand gently, speaking in a low, soothing tone. "And the little bird was so small, everyone thought it couldn't fly," Maria said, her voice weaving like a melody. "But the bird believed. It flapped its tiny wings again and again, and one day, it soared higher than all the others. Because sometimes, it's not about strength, it's about courage." Lily let out a tiny giggle, so faint Ethan almost missed it. But it was there, a sound he hadn't heard in weeks. His heart skipped a beat. He leaned closer, watching as Maria continued the story, her hands animated, her eyes full of kindness. "And then," she whispered dramatically, "the bird discovered that the sky had no end. It could fly, forever, as long as it believed." Lily smiled, her eyelids fluttering, her frail body relaxing for the first time in days. Ethan was stunned. Doctors with the best degrees, nurses with years of training, and millions spent on treatments, and yet, this humble maid, with nothing but words and love, had managed to do what none of them could: make his daughter smile. He felt an unfamiliar sting in his eyes, and he quickly looked away, ashamed of his tears. He had built walls his whole life, walls of power, money, and pride. But in this moment, those walls were crumbling. He realized he hadn't spoken to Maria much in all the years she had worked in his home. She was just the maid, someone who cleaned the floors and tidied the rooms. He had never considered that behind her uniform was a heart so vast, capable of giving his daughter the one thing he couldn't: peace. As the story ended, Lily's breaths grew steady, and she drifted into sleep with a faint smile still on her lips. Maria tucked the blanket around her gently, humming a soft lullaby from her own childhood. Ethan stood frozen, watching her, his chest tight with a mixture of awe and guilt. When Maria finally looked up, she seemed startled to see him standing there. She quickly lowered her eyes, whispering, "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to intrude." She just looked lonely. But Ethan couldn't speak. His throat burned with words he couldn't form. He only nodded slightly, stepping back into the hall as Maria quietly left the room. That night, he lay awake in his vast, empty bedroom. For the first time in his life, he wasn't thinking about stock markets, business deals, or profits. He was thinking about a maid's story, a child's smile, and the cruel reality that all the money in the world couldn't buy what Maria had given freely: love, hope, and humanity. The days that followed carried with them an unspoken shift inside the mansion. Where there had once been only shadows and silence, faint traces of warmth began to return. Lily's laughter, so fragile, yet so radiant, became a sound that echoed softly through the halls. Ethan would find himself pausing mid-step just to hear it, his heart aching each time, knowing it was not medicine or machines but Maria's gentle spirit that had coaxed it back. Maria became more than a maid in those weeks. Each morning, she arrived at Lily's bedside before the doctors and nurses. She would bring something simple, something thoughtful. Sometimes it was a flower plucked from the garden, its petals still kissed by dew. Other times it was a bowl of broth she had made in the servant's kitchen, infused with herbs her grandmother once used to heal the sick in her village. She sang lullabies in a language Ethan didn't understand, and though the words were foreign, the melody was so tender that even he felt his chest loosen listening to it. Ethan often lingered in the doorway, unseen, as Maria and Lily shared moments money could never buy. He watched as his daughter's dull eyes began to flicker with life when Maria told her stories of courage and kindness, fables of children who overcame impossible odds, of small acts of goodness that grew into miracles. Lily listened intently, smiling, her imagination carrying her far beyond the four walls of her bedroom. For the first time since her diagnosis, Ethan saw not the illness but the little girl she had always been, bright, curious, alive. One evening, when the house was especially still, Ethan finally found the courage to step into the room while Maria sat at Lily's side. Lily had drifted to sleep, her hand still wrapped in Maria's. The billionaire, a man feared by his competitors and revered by his employees, cleared his throat but felt small, almost timid. "Why?" he asked softly. Maria looked up, puzzled. "Why do you do all this?" he continued, his voice cracking with rawness he hadn't allowed anyone to hear. "You're not family. You're not paid for this. Why care so much when you owe us nothing?" Maria lowered her gaze, brushing a loose strand of hair from Lily's forehead before answering. Her voice was steady but carried the weight of her own history. "Because love is the only medicine that never runs out," she said. "I lost my little sister to the same illness when we were children. My parents had nothing. Not doctors, not hospitals, not money. All we could give her was love, and though it didn't save her body, it gave her peace. It made her last days full of laughter instead of fear. I could not save my sister, but maybe, in some small way, I can give Lily what I could not give her." Ethan felt as though the air had been knocked from his lungs. The words burrowed deep inside him, dismantling the cold armor he had worn for decades. Love, the one thing he had overlooked in his relentless pursuit of wealth, was the very thing his daughter needed most. He sank into a chair, covering his face with his hands, and for the first time in years, he wept openly. As the weeks passed, Lily's health remained fragile. The doctors were clear that nothing had changed medically, but something undeniable was different. She smiled more. She laughed, sometimes until tears rolled down her cheeks. She asked Ethan to sit beside her and listen to Maria's stories, and though he felt awkward at first, soon he found himself hanging on to every word like a child. He realized how much he had missed, not only in the short time since Lily's illness began but in the years before, when he was too busy building empires to notice the little girl waiting for him at home. One afternoon, Lily looked at her father, her tiny hand reaching for his. "Daddy, do you know what Maria told me today?" "What's that, sweetheart?" he asked, squeezing her fingers gently. "She said even the smallest candle can light up the darkest room." I think she's right. She makes me feel like the darkness isn't so scary anymore. Ethan's throat tightened, his eyes burning once again. He glanced at Maria, who sat quietly nearby, humility in her posture, as though she didn't realize the profound impact she was making. 3 months slowly passed, and though Lily's body was still frail, the mansion no longer felt like a place of despair. It was filled with music, laughter, and stories. Ethan knew the doctor's words could still come true at any moment, but he also knew something extraordinary had happened. Maria had given him back time with his daughter, not just time measured in days or weeks, but in joy, in connection, in love. On the final day of that 3-month mark, Ethan gathered his courage and spoke to Maria in the garden. "You've given me something no doctor, no fortune could buy," he said, his voice heavy with sincerity. "You gave me back my little girl. You gave me back my heart." Tears welled in Maria's eyes, but she shook her head. "I didn't give you anything, sir. Lily has always had joy inside her. She just needed someone to remind her it was still there." For the first time in his life, Ethan understood that wealth was not measured in numbers or possessions. It was measured in love, in kindness, in the ability to give without expecting anything in return. And in Maria's quiet compassion, he saw the truest wealth he had ever known. From that day forward, Ethan vowed never to let love be absent from his life again. The billionaire who once believed money could solve everything now knew the truth. The greatest treasures in this world are born not from power, but from the simple, selfless act of caring for another human being.